Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I've been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for you every single day since August 2019. And we're continuing to march forward through yet another offseason together. All right, folks, a lot to talk about as it pertains to the Jacksonville Jaguars today. It's been a busy week for the Jaguars, frankly. Busy last really 2 weeks since they, got eliminated by the Buffalo Bills in the wild card round. Since then, the focus has turned really completely to coaching, and as it should. I mean, as the critical part of this time of the year is when coaching staffs get sorted out. It's when rising coaches get new jobs, teams get new coordinators, and most importantly, teams get new head coaches. And of course, we are seeing the Jacksonville Jaguars get, impacted by the head coaching searches and the coaching carousels around the NFL and even around college, really for the first time in a long time. I mean, the Jaguars have always, each year I've covered them, they've lost some assistant coaches. They've never had guys getting poached, though, to be head coaches. I think the last two guys who were coordinators for the Jaguars and went on to become head coaches in some capacity at some level were Mike Smith with Jack Del Rio and Mel Tucker, also with Jack Del Rio. The Jags have been through, frankly, a couple of different eras since then. And all the attention now is on offensive coordinator Grant Udinski and defense coordinator Anthony Campanile. Grant Udinski, obviously, is a finalist with the Cleveland Browns. He has a second in-person interview with them later this week, I believe on Friday. I know some people have read into the fact that he's their last currently scheduled in-person interview. That's not true because they still have Nate Shieldhouse to interview. It looks like they're going to go, obviously through with that. They can't do that until Monday, I believe. And then, they still need to conduct another interview to get in compliance with the Rooney Rule. Mike McDaniel withdrawing before speaking to them in person, is putting their search maybe a little bit behind the eight ball. Of course, Grant Udinski has also drawn interest from the Buffalo Bills now. The Bills have requested to speak with, I want to say, 6 coaches so far since firing Sean McDermott, and Grant Udinski is one of those coaches. Now, I get the very obvious sense that the immediate threat is Cleveland. I've told you guys for the last week or so, I believe, and I've heard, frankly, Grant Udinski is a very real candidate in Cleveland. I think if you ask Cleveland's ownership and Andrew Bear right now, who would they like to hire? It'd probably be Grant Udinski. I personally believe that there's still a chance that Jim Schwartz gets the job. Because I know the locker room clearly doesn't want him to go anywhere. I don't think ownership does as well. I think in a best case scenario, if you're Cleveland, you'd get Grant as a head coach and keep Jim Schwartz on as DC, and everybody would go on and be happy and merry. I don't get the impression that's a very viable outcome. I get the impression that Schwartz has kind of indicated that, if he's working in Cleveland any longer, it's going to be as the head coach. He's not going to just go back to work again for a different head coach, a new head coach, after he came there, obviously, several seasons ago. He is, he's been a head coach before. He's an elite defensive coordinator. To me, the question of will Grant Udinski get hired by the Browns really comes down to, are the Browns comfortable with Jim Schwartz leaving their building? If they are, then I believe either Grant Udinski or Nate Shieldhouse, but more specifically Grant Udinski, will be their head coach. If the Browns are not willing to let Jim Schwartz leave, then I think the Jaguars, are pretty well off. I mean, who knows what happens with the Buffalo job? God, it really seems like that's going to be one of 3 guys, either Joe Brady, Brian Dable, or Davis Webb, which, whatever, what are you doing? Dang, that's weird. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of positives to say about any of those 3 potential moves, especially Dable. That's another domino that fell for the Jaguars. It sure seemed like Robert Saleh and everybody and their brother was reporting that Mike McDaniel was the guy he had pegged as his offensive coordinator. He wanted to bring with him to Tennessee. Doesn't look like Mike McDaniel got the memo. He's going to Los Angeles to the Chargers to be their offensive coordinator, pending, of course, he doesn't get a head coaching job. If Brian Daboll doesn't get the Buffalo Bills job, it sure looks like that he will head to Tennessee and be Robert Saleh and Cam Ward's offense coordinator. I know I'm going to sound like a hater. And I know that fans are going to fan. That fans need to look for the good in things. To be a fan is to be hopeful. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I've seen lots of Tennessee fans just post endless Josh Allen copium about why Brian Daboll is actually pretty good. I don't think Brian Daboll made Josh Allen, believe it or not, people. I think Josh Allen, who put up great numbers with Joe Brady, put up great numbers with Ken Dorsey. I think Brian Daboll was in the right place at the right time for Josh Allen's development, frankly. I thought Brian Daboll was really bad in New York as an offensive mind, whatever. I mean, he never had good offenses. And I think if you're the Jaguars, Brian Daboll heading to Tennessee is a best case scenario. I believe it was Albert Breer said, along with Daboll, other names connected to that job are Cliff Kingsbury and Arthur Smith. I think Arthur Smith's a better offensive coordinator and play caller than Brian Daboll. So we'll see. Obviously now, whether it's Grant, whether it's Daboll or not Daboll, the Jaguars now have some reason to be invested in the outcome of the Buffalo Bills job. And then there's Anthony Campanile. He has already gotten 2 interviews, one with the Miami Dolphins, one with the Baltimore Ravens. And then out of nowhere, a third team has entered the conversation for the Jaguars star defense coordinator in the Arizona Cardinals. And evidently, it's not even his first interview with them. He is taking his second interview with them in person. He is a finalist for that job. And if I'm Arizona and I'm looking at the current, guys out there, you probably won't get Minter. Probably won't get McDermott. Probably won't get McDaniel. I'm hiring Camp over anybody named Kubiak. I mean, I'm hiring Camp over, in my opinion, even Chris Shula. I'm hiring Camp over a lot of guys. I think Camp would be a home run hire for Arizona. I'm not sure they do it. I think he might still need another year to really sell teams, but just from my perspective, if I had any question about Udinski as a head coach, it has nothing to do with his age, though definitely a factor. It has nothing to do with the fact that he's only coached offensive football for the last 4 years, I believe, 3 or 4 years. It mostly has to do with the fact that I have no idea who he would hire for his staff. I just don't know how many connections he has. Whereas Campanile, he's got a ton of connections. He's worked for McDaniel. He's worked with Flores. He's worked with Fangio. He's worked with LaFleur. He's worked with Cohen now. I mean, he's got a lot of these, I think, connections to where I think Camp would probably build a pretty good staff. So ultimately, I think that, that's one to watch for the Jaguars. And I've told you guys before, I think Camp would be a bigger loss for the Jaguars than Grant Udinski ultimately would be. All right. Finally, the last little bit of news from the Jaguars this week, they signed Miami Dolphins cornerback coach Mateo Arujo. My apologies if I mispronounce it. I'm not trying to. I hate the mispronouncement of names, so my apologies. But guys, I asked around on him after they hired him. It wasn't a guy who was on my radar. Some people think this guy's a future star. And he's worked with Camp at Boston College. He worked with Camp at Miami. He worked with Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio was supposedly a huge fan of his, and he had him work very closely with him on some projects. I think that this is a home run hire for the Jaguars, regardless of what happens with Camp. And to me, it makes a bunch of sense. Bring in a young, hungry guy whose star is rising, as opposed to Ron Miles, who, no disrespect to him, because he did do a good job, but frankly, he just seemed like kind of an outlier fit with the direction the Jaguars are building in. I think this hire makes a lot more sense. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. We'll be back next time.